When you think about the Revolutionary War, what normally comes to mind is a couple of years of bloody fighting between the Americas and Great Britain, followed by America somehow miraculously winning its independence. However, no one ever mentions what was happening behind the scenes.
During the Revolutionary War, the United States was greatly outgunned and outmanned, so, to compensate for that, they stole British supplies such as cannons. The Americans were poorly prepared when they jumped into a war with one of the greatest military powers of that time, so stealing supplies gave them a chance to even the playing field. Even though they did as much as they could on their own, the Americans still couldn't have won the war without support from other countries. France, Spain, and Holland provided troops and funding to the revolting colonies. They also fought against Britain on a second front. Another strategy the Americans used was avoiding large-scale confrontations with the British by hiding behind trees, rocks, fences, etc., and firing at the enemy soldiers before disappearing into their surroundings. In contrast, Great Britain at that time was one of the leading military powers in the world. Their style of fighting was much more organized and they were better prepared for the task at hand. They had more supplies and funding available to them than the Americans, and their military was better trained. This was shown when the British armies charged into battle in formations compared to the Americans' untrained militia. A more subtle strategy the British used was wearing brightly colored uniforms. This was a type of psychological warfare. When their enemies glimpsed them from a distance, they recognized that the British were approaching and it invoked fear in them. The British also planned to capture one of the most vital colonial ports, Boston. By blockading Boston, the British could cut off an essential resource that was provided to the colonies. Without this necessary supply line, the colonists would not be able to receive supplies or earn money from exporting goods and selling them overseas.
However, not everything about the two opposing army strategies was different. They had a few things in common, one being spying. A great number of the spies have never been discovered to this day. Some of the spies that we know about include Benjamin Franklin and Nathan Hale, who were spies for the Americans. There were also female spies who aided in the war. One of these people was Lydia Darrow, who lived in Philadelphia. When she overheard British officers discussing their plans, she would write the plans down and hide them in pieces of cloth. These were then sent to her son, who then gave them to his brother, who gave it to Washington. With this vital information, the Americans would gain a small edge on the powerful British army. Females were considered innocent and non-threatening to men, which made it much easier for them to gather and smuggle information from place to place.
Speaking of women, spying was not the only way they contributed to the war efforts. Some females followed the camp for safety and shelter and performed small tasks such as cooking and cleaning for the Continental Army. Because there weren't very many soldiers to spare, no one wanted to take their troops away from the battlefield for other tasks. There were a lot of women who came to the camp seeking safety from the war, but the armies could not afford to spend their resources on sheltering women who didn't contribute in some way. So instead of the men taking care of the cooking and cleaning, women did their share to earn food rations and the right to stay in the army's camp. However, some of these women snuck into the ranks by dressing up as men. The men would not allow women to fight among them, so to be able to join the other troops on the battlefield, women were forced to masquerade as men. An example of this is Deborah Sampson, who pretended to be a man named Robert Shirtliff and fought with the army. She fought bravely until she was eventually caught, but she was discharged from the army with honor, and she had earned respect among her fellow soldiers. There were many young boys and men who had signed up for the army, and since they were so young, they still had high voices and didn't have to shave. Because of this, women could easily pass as these young male soldiers.
Aside from the women who were directly involved with the army, there were many war efforts from home as well. Ever heard of the Sons of Liberty, who fought against the British on a smaller scale? They worked hand in hand with the Daughters of Liberty. Like the Sons, the Daughters boycotted British tea. They also wouldn't accept men for marriage who weren't loyal to the Patriot cause. They had even spun wool for military clothing and held contests to bring more attention to the revolution. Even though these seemed like the most simple of fights, every protest counted to get more people rebelling against the British. There were also many women who weren't with the Daughters of Liberty and supported the Americans in the Revolution. Some of them used the press to write about it through words. A woman named Mary Catherine Goddard had started her own newspaper company after her brother taught her how to print newspapers. She published her newspapers throughout the war and was the first person Congress asked to print a copy of the Declaration of Independence. Slaves had even contributed to the cause as well. A female slave named Phyllis Wheatley wrote poems before and after the war and became even more famous with her poems during the American Revolution. She wrote poems honoring George Washington, the Army's general during that time. And in another poem she had written "We for Freedom Fight." She was granted her own freedom in 1773 from her owner, John Wheatley. Her final poem was about the American victory against the British, and it was published in 1784, a few days after she died. In summary, the opposing sides of the war had varying battle strategies that had their advantages and disadvantages. The Americans avoided the British and fired at them from afar. For the most part, they blended in with the common citizens. The British, on the other hand, were much more organized and marched in formations. They also wore brightly colored uniforms to make them feared around the world. Women had contributed as well, with tasks that went a long way for the other republic. Like men, women had spied on the British and fought side by side with their fellow soldiers. Even at home, everyone was at work to make their cause worth fighting for. Because of all the contributions made behind the scenes, America ended up earning its freedom after the British surrender at Yorktown with the Treaty of Paris. Without the brilliant strategizing of the generals and unwavering support from women, it is very unlikely that we would be where we are today. We would still be governed under the iron fist of Britain and not have a voice in government. Thankfully, this is not the case, and we are able to vote for our representatives and have the freedoms granted to us in the Constitution. It's beautiful.
How do you open? Oh, you push.
It doesn't have your face, don't worry. Do you want me to show your face?
Oh, just my legs.
Yeah, it just has your legs. Your feet. That's our super professional lighting. This is our super professional thingy, and that's our.
Can you not do that?
That's our set, right there.
And that's me
And
right here.
this professional camera is on a professional tripod, as you can see. It's like the